I clean up crime scenes for a living. It's not a job you usually tell people about. Those who already know don't really want to hear about it either. I never would have seen myself doing it. I didn't even realize it was a job until I found it. I was a high school dropout that slung petty amounts of weed to college students. When my girlfriend at the time, now wife, got pregnant, I knew I had to pull my shit together. Knowing I was going to have a boy of my own made me realize I had to become a man. With no diploma or anything, the best paying job I could find was cleanup. Honestly, I don't mind it. The pay is not bad and it's not a huge city, so there is a lot of downtime. We do chemical and medical cleanup as well as general biohazard. Most people last a month at most in the job. It's cruel, but we actually test them a little and take them to all the worst jobs that come up that first month. It's necessary to make sure that they are actually going to stick around. Last week, I took a new hire, Chad, along to clean up after a guy who'd killed his wife and daughter and then himself with a 12-gauge shotgun. Chad played high school football and thought he had made it. Now, when he didn't get that college scholarship, he realized he had no skills and didn't know what to do with himself. He threw up as soon as we opened the door and saw what was inside. I had to call him a taxi. I was expecting a little more from him, to be honest, but shotgun cleanups are among the worst. It's not the blood. Most of the time the carpet gets thrown away, so you just have to get enough out that it's no longer soaking. If they got an artery, then there might be some on the walls, but it's still not that bad unless it ended up on the ceiling. No, it's the skull and the brains that make a shotgun cleanup so shitty. You have to check everywhere to make sure you got every last piece. I have found pieces of skulls behind clocks, tucked into corners, under beds, and even inside of a TV once. The pieces of brain can come out with enough force to get wedged into gaps in furniture and flooring. The buckshot can also be a bitch, especially if it's dug into wood. I'll do everything I can to persuade them to throw the door or cupboard out, but sometimes it's got sentimental value and I have to dig in there with tweezers. Right now there's only me and Gavin at the company. He bought the business cheap last year after Caroline left. Gavin has spent 8 years doing cleanup. Much as I don't mind the job, I hope I don't turn into him. Caroline had been doing cleanup for I don't even know how long. I just know she left to retire, but I had at least been cleaning since back in the 80s. There was a small drug or turf war in our city back then, and she had some horror stories. I was always kind of humbled and respectful of how long she had lasted. She joked that after raising 4 kids, she realized that a little muck ain't nothing to be afraid of. There also used to be a guy called Hardy. I guess all of us have to be a little weird to be doing this work. It needs a special kind of detachment. Hardly, though. He seemed to enjoy it at times. He'd crack jokes like, "She sure lost her head," or "Hey, need a hand?" Shitty puns. I hated working with the guy. I didn't hate him, I just hated working with him. It was the fact that working with him reminded me what I was actually doing, that these were parts of people. Gavin ended up firing Hardy after he got caught trying to take home what had been described to me only as a souvenir. I don't think even Hardy would have got a kick out of today's scene, though. As I made my way across the lawn, I could already smell the scene. I gagged a little when the decay hit the back of my throat. As I got closer, I struggled not to throw up. Far worse than shotgun cleanups are what we call an unattended death. An unattended death is when someone has died but nobody noticed. Usually old people whose families don't care. Maybe their kids are ungrateful, maybe they were terrible parents. Either way, sad stuff. It's not the sadness that gets you though, it's the smell. Even Caroline, who must have dealt with countless unattended deaths, would still gag. Bear in mind, you go in wearing a mask to filter your air and get most of the smell out, and you struggle not to hurl. It's almost unbearably sweet, but also like a fishing bait box. Something about that smell triggers a primal part of your brain that knows that smell is something you need to get away from. Unfortunately, when you do cleanup, you can't get away from it. The next best thing is Vicks or some other heavily mentholated oil. I took my emergency bottle of Vicks out and smothered it into my mustache to overpower the smell. My wife hates the mustache, but it acts as a reservoir for Vicks. Gavin taught me that trick. We probably looked a little suspicious, 2 guys with mustaches hanging out together. I put the mask back on and stepped into the house. I could still smell the decay faintly over my peppermint mustache. The layout of the house was one of those ones where the front door opens right into a living room with an open-plan kitchen and normally a table for eating at. There was no furniture in the room, though. It was gutted to make room for what I guess should be called a display. It seemed to mainly be children, or what were children. None of them were whole. Put back together, they'd maybe be 4 or 5. The parts are in varying stages of decay, most of them probably at least a month gone. No heads, flies swarmed around the room. The blood on the floor was fresh, which was strange considering the body parts. The flooring was hardwood, so there was no carpet that could be thrown out. A small splash in the corner of my sight made me notice that blood is dripping onto the floor from above. So I look up. Whoever the sick fuck that did this is, they pissed me off on a professional level. I can't believe how much blood they managed to get up there. It was a porous plaster ceiling, so it had acted like a sponge. Some of it had begun clotting. Screw it. I'll get rid of the body parts first. I get about 7 limbs in before I notice something small between the floorboards. I bent down and coaxed it out. A child's tooth. I looked back down at the floor and noticed there are more white shards in between the floorboards and brains. God fucking damn it. It's at this point I had a weird realization. I've become so good at detaching myself from my work that I'm not bothered that a person has done some incredibly sick things to more than one child. What bothers me is how difficult that same person is making my job. Far more than I was salty about the child murderer, I was pissed at Gavin for calling in sick today. Fuck you, Gavin. I scanned over the scene again, realizing that this might be more than a day's work. The body parts just have to be bagged. That's only a few hours' work, but the ceiling and the floorboard might take a day each. I decided to do the ceiling first, so that only I have to do the floor once. I bagged up 2 torsos and a few more limbs and headed back to the van for the ladder and the special blood cleaning fluids. I go back in with the ladder under one arm and a tub of cleaning fluid in each hand. It was an awkward waddle as the ladder tucked under my arm swings around, knocking me off balance with every step. Fucking Gavin. I went back, set up the ladder, and opened the first tub, which is for blood that hasn't yet clotted, and get to scrubbing. I wasn't sure how many hours had passed by the time I finished the first scrub down, but it's dark outside. Blood was still soaked into the plaster, but not enough to drip onto the floor. I figured I'll bleach tomorrow, even though they'll probably just replace everything anyways. Whatever, we charge by the hour. I still had to get rid of what has clotted into the ceiling, which is the really tiring work. I climb down the ladder, go to the van for the scrapers, and go back into the house. As I start scraping away at the clots, I notice some weird scratches in the plaster. This was obviously how the killer got the blood to soak into the ceiling. I follow one, clearing everything of it, then climb down the ladder to see if I could spot another scratch. The one I cleaned out looked like a letter, sort of like an N, or A, or U. I thought it was a weird coincidence and get back to cleaning the rest of the ceiling. After I finished, I climbed down the ladder and looked up. That's when I realized that everything annoying about this job wasn't the disturbed ritual of a serial killer. I read the name carved into the ceiling above me, each letter about a foot tall. Gavin.